All right, thank you again for joining JMT Consulting for our expert speaker series. My name is Melissa Waters, and I'm the manager of events and programs at JMT. And today we're happy to have Daniel Guiney, founder of ZRM Brokerage, presenting on taking the risk out of risk management. This webinar is sponsored by JMT Consulting. We are an ERP and financial management solutions firm with 28 years experience, and we specialize in nonprofits. We work with a wide variety of software partners to find the best solution for your nonprofit. I'd like to share a few housekeeping notes, and then I'll turn it over to Daniel. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit your questions in the questions portion of your control panel. We will answer those questions at the end of the webinar. You'll also receive a survey at the end of the webinar to tell us how we did today. Finally, today's webinar today's webinar is being recorded and will be sent out to you in a thank you email along with the slides. So look for that in your inbox this afternoon. Finally, I'd like to introduce Daniel. As founder of ZRM Brokerage and a winner of the 2018 Millie Award from the Westchester and Fairfield County Business Journal, Daniel believes in a vision grounded in honesty, integrity, and synergy. He provides white glove service and sharp critical thinking skills while advising clients and building relationships nationwide. He's licensed as both a P&C and life and A&H insurance broker. He also holds an MBA degree from La Pinta School of Business at Iona College. He believes risk management advisory should embody more than just insurance. It should be a strategic relationship that helps nonprofit businesses and highly successful families achieve their goals. Outside of the office, he spends his downtime playing chess, freshwater fishing, and rooting for the Knicks. And with that, I will hand it over to Daniel.
Outstanding. Thank you, Melissa. I really appreciate you. And thank you again to JMT Consulting for organizing this event. Hello to everybody tuning in on the webinar. My name is Daniel Guiney, and today we're going to take the risk out of risk management. If I can get the slideshow to start, we'll jump right into it. There we go. All right, so we're taking the risk out of risk management, with the overall purpose being to reduce costs and empower your mission with peace of mind. Now, to kick this off and put everything into context, I'm going to ask you to consider this. For nonprofits, the United States is a land of both opportunity and litigation. Take a moment to think about how your organization might handle these scenarios. First, hackers take control of your organizational servers, including the entire donor database. They promise not to leak anything if only you pay them $250,000 in Bitcoin. Or maybe the president of your board of directors is accused of alleged misconduct. Twitter picked up on it, and it just went viral. Or maybe the CFO at your organization has been taking extra frequent trips to Mar-a-Lago, and for some reason the balance sheets just don't seem to be adding up this year. Now, I'm sure you'll agree that it's no secret nonprofits have been targeted by increased scrutiny over the past several years. With advances in technology, regulation, corporate responsibility, and a 24/7 news cycle, the need to enhance risk management in nonprofit organizations has never been greater. The internet and access to increased accountability metrics allow highly qualified donors to conduct research at unprecedented levels before selecting how to allocate their donation. This certainly makes things difficult. As a nonprofit, you're probably wondering how you can best improve your risk management capabilities without exhausting your human or financial capital resources, while also making yourself more attractive to donors and having a sustainable mission. Well, I'm happy to tell you that by attending this webinar, you've set yourself apart from the crowd and are well on your way towards implementing practical risk management solutions into your organization. Taking a look at today's objective. So today we're going to be doing really two things. First, we're going to be implementing tactics that can increase the sustainability of your mission for the long term. And second, we're going to be empowering your organization with this information and strategies to reduce long-term costs and bring peace of mind into your organization and your everyday decision-making process. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do it through strategic enterprise risk management. Nonprofits can reduce the likeliness of losses and uncertainty from occurring in the first place. This brings down long-term costs of litigation, overhead expenses, and most certainly insurance. In addition, a strategic risk management plan will empower your organization. Taking a look at the agenda, this is how we're going to run through the webinar. First, we're going to jump in a little bit about who I am and why I'm speaking on this topic. We'll then broach the concept of risk management in context. We'll then take a look at the risk management process from a global perspective before identifying and evaluating the general risks that apply to every nonprofit regardless of size. So if you're a startup, just superseding having been a hobby, or you're a full-scale multinational organization, these are risks that are pertinent to your organization. We'll then take a look at managing volunteer risks, which is definitely a point of interest for anyone looking to manage their risk management. We'll then look at mitigation and transfer of risk strategies to take risk away from your organization in its entirety. And then we're going to look at a couple of risk evaluation tools you can use now in your organization. So who's speaking? Well, my name is Daniel Guiney. As I was introduced before, I have an MBA from the LaPenta School of Business, priorly known as the Hagen School of Business at Iona College. I'm a licensed property and casualty as well as life, accident, health insurance broker. So I help my clients with a full spread of insurance coverages. And I'm a nonprofit enterprise risk management specialist. What does that mean? Well, I've been doing risk management for coming up on 7 years now. And when launching my brokerage, through my personal experiences, I found nonprofits to be the most underserved demographic in the insurance sector, and I made it my absolute mission to correct that. Personally, I've been involved with a number of organizations, including Hearts of Gold here in New York City, where we work with women and children in the shelter systems and transitioning into a sustainable lifestyle. I've organized events, United Way of Westchester and Putnam County, including their United We Rock event for millennials. I've participated with their ELA. I've led a wonderful panel for the 2019 Nonprofit Leadership Summit here in New York, and I'm always looking for more ways to get involved. I want to take a moment now to just thank you for being here today, taking the time out of your schedule to tune in, and I'd appreciate you just throwing a couple of thumbs up to let me know you're still with me. Awesome. All right, I see those thumbs up coming in. Okay, let's jump into some of the meat and potatoes here. So before we start diving into any of the specifics, I want to put this in context, right? Risk management at first glance implies hazards or danger, but diving deeper into risk has both positive and negative dimensions to it. While many risk management experts may focus on the reduction or avoidance of risk as their primary call to action, I like to argue that we should take a more positive, proactive approach to it. You see, especially in nonprofit organizations, I would argue that viewing risk as only a negative doesn't fully appreciate the mission of a nonprofit. By their nature, some nonprofit organizations inherently accept risk as part of their mission by providing services such as relief and development in war zones or at-risk communities here in America. Furthermore, risks are essential to growth, and to avoid them like the plague could mean missing out on substantial positive opportunities. We have to be willing to take risks to grow. Now, regardless of your crafting recycled instruments to teach music or servicing these at-risk communities who desperately require aid and assistance, strategic risk management can be a prime catalyst for enhancing and perpetuating your mission. So now let's talk about the risk management process and why should you allocate any financial or human capital towards risk management at all? Well, the concept of itself may sound well and good. And you may be asking yourself, well, what about if my organizations are already running smoothly? We already have systems in place. Why should we change anything? Why should we allocate anything towards risk management? While pressing deadlines are closing in, your staff is overworked. But I would argue that risk management is really a top-down approach for a long-term protection of assets, human resources, and the reputation of your organization well beyond the scope of insurance. Let's say, for argument's sake, that your organization is trusted by and reliant on donors to keep operations afloat. In your opinion, which of these events would be more detrimental? Embezzlement of funds by a volunteer or the resulting negative press from the story breaking? Picture that happening to your organization. Now, in that situation, if you don't press charges, would your insurance policy provide coverage? Did you even decide to purchase a crime policy in the first place? Maybe you don't have a PR response plan. Proper risk management and the planning associated with it will assist you with implementing safeguards that help prevent this situation from occurring and provide a structure for you to decide on the action of unfortunate events when they do. Now, there are 7 primary risks that we want to take a look at in any organization. And we all agree that risk management is important. So in the first section, we're going to take a broad look at these 7 risks and how they pose a threat to your organization, regardless of size. While we're going through this section, I asked you to take notes on how these categories affect, apply, and are reviewed within your organization on an ongoing basis. Now, to put it in even further context, I want to throw a quick definition out there for 2 terms in risk management that everybody should be aware of. First is uncertainty. Now, uncertainty is a lack of knowledge that we're unable to obtain no matter how many analytics or scenarios we run. An example of this might be, how effective would bringing in a new director be for this organization? We're going to circle back around this at the end, and I'll show you some tools as how you can structure that question in a better way and really get a deep dive analysis of it. So that way you can make an informed decision. Loss, on the other hand, is the damage or destruction of an asset utilized by your organization to further your mission. And there are 4 primary categories of assets that we'll touch on a little later. Now, both uncertainty and loss is something that you can evaluate, mitigate, and transfer away from your organization through proper risk management. So the first of the 7 essential risks that must be considered by each nonprofit is the uncertainty of loss regarding their property. These risks can generally be classified into 2 categories, and those are tangible or intangible property. Take a moment to think about what parts of your organization may fall into each of these classifications. Some examples for you to consider are shown here, and I'm not going to read through them. But as you can see, the term property within risk management is inclusive and does not only relate to property owned by your organization. Additionally, it's important to take note of the digital property that your organization may be liable for. Any identifying record you collect and store, such as a name, address, telephone number, social security numbers, you become liable for this information. Donor and prospect records must be treated with the utmost security. In the event that your database is compromised, your organization will be responsible for notifying each individual of their potential data breach, as well as identity monitoring and associated public response that needs to come with that. Now, here are a couple of other things I ask you to consider regarding property risks in your organization. And these are some things that I touch on during risk management audits with all of my clients. So, do volunteers use their own vehicles? How is contributor personal data and records stored? What's the retention timeline on those records? What about prospecting lists? Do you have a data retention strategy for those? What about the physical property you occupy? If you own the building, do you have fire suppression systems in place? If so, do you have the appropriate credits applied for those? These are all things you want to take into consideration during your risk management reviews and discussions to help mitigate the risks surrounding your property. The second primary risk I want to take a look at today is the income risk. Now, this is broadly discussed as money in and money out of the organization. However, often the reality of what empowers a nonprofit to pursue its mission is the flow of money. Funds flowing into your organization can be derived from goods and services, donations, government grants, and a variety of other sources. Additionally important, however, is to consider how the funds are flowing out of your organization. This could be overhead costs, salaries, wages, purchasing equipment, supplies, material, special events, and other various ventures that you may find yourself involved with. In a perfect world, this balance wouldn't become interrupted, but someone as seasoned as yourself in the nonprofit space knows that life just doesn't always work that way. Adverse economic conditions, accidents, and inaccuracies of business judgment are all situations that nonprofits must be ready to confront. With any income that flows through your nonprofit, due diligence must always be enforced, and you must always apply a risk management mindset to the conversation. For example, Let's say that your nonprofit received property as a bequest. Pretty nice, right? But are you prepared for the additional challenges this may impose in your organization? Looking beyond the costs of taxes and maintenance, what if an unknown heir presents themselves and claims ownership of the property? Are you ready for that legal battle? What about if the land is unknowingly polluted or back taxes are owed? Is your organization prepared to face the impending legal hurdles? Any wise nonprofit won't automatically accept contributions without first enforcing a risk management mindset to confirm that the contribution will disadvantage the organization, threaten its reputation, impose restriction on its activities, or offer a greater financial benefit to the donor than the nonprofit. For example, let's say you have a nonprofit and you're combating lung cancer. If Marlboro decides to make a large donation to your organization, who is that really helping more? Do you want to position your nonprofit in a situation where they now publicly accepted records from somebody that you're in contention with? What processes do you have in place for screening donations for additional expenses and exposures? What type of planned supply and material purchase are you planning on making over the coming years? And is there an opportunity to buy them in bulk? What type of grants are you pursuing? And how can you align your organization to be reflected in a better light so you have a better chance of achieving those grants? And even coming down to special events, is your current coverage appropriate? Do you have the proper protocols in place to make sure that your organization is not going to be caught out for doing something that's great for the community? Now, these are just a couple of other things that I always review during risk audits. Onto the third category of risks. This is the broad category of liability risks. Now, even with the best intentions, sometimes an organization can still be found legally responsible for harming an individual, other organizations, or even society itself. Although liability can take many forms, some of the standard exposures nonprofits face I've listed here, and I'm going to touch upon briefly to give a little more context. So compensatory damages. Now, this is money required by law to be paid to a wrong entity for loss. Punitive damages. Different from the prior, this is money that must be paid to those who have been harmed and deter the nonprofit from conducting similar actions. Fines. Fines are money that must be paid to the government for violation of laws or regulations. Injunctions. Court orders to cease a specific action. You may have thought that you were doing the right thing, but what if the court deems otherwise? You may have to pivot your entire organizational structure to adapt. Restitution. This is the return of money or property that a court deems was wrongfully obtained. Specific performance. These are court orders to finish specific contractual terms, even when not favorable to the nonprofit. So say you made an agreement to go in and perform a set of actions, but it later turns out that it's in contention with what your organizational mission is, or you simply don't have the means to do it effectively. Well, you can still be found liable for that, and you need to follow out on those contractual terms. What about incarceration? This could be the jailing of a nonprofit executive, director, or other key player. You should have contingency planning for your organization at each point. And of course, defense expenses. Now, defense of the nonprofit against claims brought against it is something that many people think won't happen to them. But what they often fail to consider is that you don't only need to defend yourself when you're actually found guilty of something. Any allegation can cause your organization to end up in a legal dispute, and you should have a plan in place to defend yourself. Now, even when you're found innocent, as I was just touching upon, these situations can drain your nonprofit of time, human capital, and even reputation. During your audit, you may want to consider if you have a proper PR response in place, what type of cybersecurity protocols are in place, what type of physical security protocols are in place, and have you reviewed your contractual promises this year? Are they still in alignment with what your organization is looking to do? Now, people risks. And this is one that I find to be most important and often a gaping hole in many nonprofits' risk management plans. If you see, at the core of every nonprofit is a resilient group of dedicated people that make the gears turn day in and day out. But there are many external parties that are also part of this equation. Outside of your staff, there are volunteers who are coming in and representing your organization, maybe 15 minutes of onboarding, if that. Or maybe they're a long-term volunteer instead of just done in a day. What about contractors, clients, special donors, government officials, public or private organizations? These each have a varying role to play within your strategic plan. Uniform practices should be in place for hiring or firing staff, communicating with donors and outside consultants, as well as contracts and waivers for all individuals who volunteer their efforts towards your mission. Having these uniform practices in place will ensure that there's a standard procedure that can be followed, and should any litigation occur, you can demonstrate a best effort. Now, this is especially important when you're working with vulnerable populations. Vulnerable populations can be described as any social group with an increased susceptibility to risk. Most commonly, these include individuals with disabilities, children, and dependent adults. Now, as the organization providing aid, it's legally expected that you will hold yourself to a higher standard while dealing with vulnerable individuals. And this is something that the court takes very seriously. If you're operating in this space, it's absolutely essential that you have protocols in place to review your practices. So if we were conducting an audit together, I would challenge you to consider what type of onboarding process is in place for your organization for all of these various roles. How do you clarify expectations, guidelines, and more importantly, what's your recognition strategy? Because now when you're working with volunteers, you want to retain those volunteers. What type of supplemental benefits do you offer that can encourage retention? And then, is screening in compliance with your policy? When you have an insurance policy in place, that's a core element of your risk management plan. There's often requirements in there for background checks, security screening, and if you fail to perform these actions within your organization, you can find yourself without insurance coverage during a claim situation, or certainly getting dropped at the end of that claim situation, leading to increased costs in the long term. So do yourself a favor, make sure that you have the appropriate policy protocols in place, and also check with your insurance carrier, because many are now offering discounted background checks and other resources that are available to your organization, sometimes at no charge. So make sure that you speak with your risk management advisor about these opportunities. Now, this is a real meat and potatoes section here, governance and fiduciary risks. We all know that the central governing body of a nonprofit organization is the elected board of directors. The board, as outlined in the organization's bylaws or articles of incorporation, has a legal responsibility to oversee and protect the nonprofit's assets while providing vision and guidance moving forward. Now, with that said, board members are not superheroes as much as we might want them to be. They're held to the legal expectation that they will engage in constructive deliberation and critical thinking, while held to a standard of a reasonably prudent person. Having written procedures and standards of operation will assist board members in defending their actions should a claim situation arise. And making sure that we have appropriate protections in place for our board is critical for attracting and retaining powerful board members that can help the sustainability of our organization moving forward. Decisions should be deliberated and contended openly amongst the board to avoid internal or accidental breaches of the board's duty of loyalty. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with the duty of loyalty component here, the duty of loyalty imposes upon board members a requirement that organizational interests must supersede those of personal interest while acting on behalf of the nonprofit. And I can't say this enough. Too many times, someone is friends or has a cousin that performs an action, and the nonprofit will just move forward with that. You have a legal responsibility to consider various options and make sure that the best opportunity is being selected for the nonprofit, regardless of personal relationships. It's imperative that board members remain transparent and disclose these instances to avoid any claims of liability. Additionally, should there be a contention or some kind of personal conflict, board members must discuss or vote on it in public amongst each other. Now, they really need to also recuse themselves from the conversation if that problem occurs because of their personal relationship to the organization. By not recusing themselves from the conversation, it opens the entire board up to a whole slew of legal liabilities that no one wants to deal with. And it could even lead to disastrous claim situations. Going further on the governance and fiduciary risks associated with the board's actions must always be taken in accordance with the nonprofit's mission, and the executive committee should ensure all board members are held to uniform standards. On this slide, you'll see that I've highlighted some potential risks that could open your board and organization up for claims, and these include but are not limited to the following that are listed here. Give you a moment just to browse them. Now, how often do you review your articles of incorporation? Many times when working with nonprofits, I find that their actions have grown well beyond the scope of their articles of incorporation and bylaws. And by all measures, that's fantastic. We always want to do more and bring more to the community or the society that we're helping. But if you're not operating within the bylaws of your organization, let's say that you're acting in New York, but now you've expanded to Connecticut and New Jersey, you can find yourself in a legal gray area. It's important that the board always reviews the bylaws to make sure that all actions are happening within the constraints of your organizational mission. And if you work with an attorney, you can of course have these things adjusted, but by not doing that and not adjusting your bylaws, you leave yourself open. And the last thing I want to touch on regarding governance and fiduciary risks of the board is that beyond their operational responsibility, members of the board are charged with fiduciary duties while leading the organization. Although outside auditors and bookkeeping services are often utilized to review financial statements and fairness, members of the board would be well served to understand statements of income, cash flow, and balance sheets. Now, they don't have to be accountants, and I would encourage you not to have your board accountant be the treasurer. You don't want them acting in a professional capacity while on the board. You want them acting in a personal capacity and just doing the service based on their personal interests. However, conflicts can arise if the organization utilizes the same companies for financial consulting, advisory, and auditing throughout the year. Without checks and balances, these companies may be inclined to fluff their results to enhance commission, bonuses, or other revenues for the services they render throughout the year. I would encourage the board to always outsource from multiple different organizations and avoid that with the checks and balances they implement. Now, some fiduciary duties of the board are listed here, and I would encourage you to review how you charge your board to address each of these topics. And of course, the slides are going to be available at the end, so I'd encourage you to come back to this slide and take a look and see what you actually are asking your board to do, and if they're acting within the constraints of what they're charged to do. This again comes back to the operational agreement and the requirements you set to your board during onboarding. You want to make it explicitly clear of what their requirements are, of what they're overseeing, because should they be operating outside the scope of those requirements, it again could open you up to disastrous claim situations. So for this section, again, these are a couple of things I would ask you to consider during an audit internally. When was the last time you reviewed your organizational bylaws? What does your due diligence process look like for onboarding board members? How do you set performance expectations within your organization? And do you utilize the appropriate forms and resources? This can include things like a whistleblower policy, a conflict of interest policy. Are they available and accessible? They should be. Collaboration. This is something that nonprofits love. Working together is truly the backbone of a nonprofit organization. But with increased collaboration comes increased uncertainty. Office sharing arrangements, communal events, co-sponsorships, and shared expenses can all prove to be beneficial for the nonprofit. But by engaging in any of these activities, an organization must be aware that they're inherently risky. As a nonprofit, you hold little control over the actions of your partners. However, their actions may reflect directly upon your organization in the public eye and in a legal capacity. It is up to each individual nonprofit to conduct thorough risk management evaluations and decide on a case-by-case basis if any form of collaboration will truly prove beneficial to their mission. Interactions can range from informal exchanges to strategic restructuring and full-on mergers where two organizations come together and able to pool their resources to have a better societal impact. Now, when auditing these risks in your organization, I would ask you to take a look and see who has last reviewed your memorandums of understanding. Are you even utilizing memorandums of understanding between strategic partners? One thing I saw recently in an organization I was working with was for a back-to-school drive. And this was specifically for the women and children in the organization that were being served by the organization. But one of the strategic partners was encouraging anyone to come out and access these resources from within the shelter systems. Now, this could have led to a catastrophe because when these individuals showed up, they started threatening to go to the press that they were being denied service and that it was false advertising and so on and so forth. But luckily, a director was there who was able to take control of the situation, address the confusion, and diffuse the crowd. Because now if this started going viral or they started tweeting about this, it could have opened the nonprofit up to a whole slew of different problems when it was really not their fault. They were operating appropriately, but they didn't have the correct memorandum of understanding in place to convey this information to their strategic partners and make sure everybody was advertising this on the same wavelength. So I challenge you to think about your organization and what locations you may be missing a memorandum of understanding and ways you can provide further clarity to your strategic partners and avoid any type of legal consequences to your organization. Now, this is one of my favorite sections, mission risks and reputation. Now, what keeps the gears turning at a nonprofit day in, day out is its mission. And understandably, we want to make sure that we're putting the most dollars towards the mission possible. But the mission, when mixed with public perception, is how an organizational reputation is formed. It's important to distinguish between an organization's mission and its reputation because both carry unique uncertainties and risks with them. Although working towards creating a better world, the nonprofit space is certainly a competitive one as well. Organizations challenge each other for human resources, grants, contracts, and opportunities on a daily basis. So anything you can do to differentiate your organization and make it look better in the public eye is powerful. On that note, you want to maintain a competitive edge. It's important to review your mission often and ensure that it is in alignment with your bylaws, as I was touching on previously. Some common risks to a nonprofit's mission include, but are not limited to, accepting a donation in exchange for doing something that is at odds with your mission. Maybe it's from a source that contradicts your nonprofit's values, or entering into a contract to do something that is contradictory to the mission. And that may not be immediately evident without some deeper evaluation. What about discriminating against people who might qualify for services? That's something I touched on briefly. You want to make sure that not only are you being very clear about who qualifies for your services, but that you're at least annually reviewing the eligibility requirements for your services, making sure that they are publicly portrayed, and additionally making sure that uniform practices and service are provided to everyone who is eligible. You don't want to differentiate your services and provide specific enhanced services for some people. It opens yourself up for definite liability claims. Now, failing to publish or update these eligibility requirements can also open you up to various claims and challenges from people in the public eye. Entering a collaborative relationship with another organization, whether public, private, or independent, whose mission or business practices are contrary to or inconsistent with those of the nonprofit is definitely also something you want to be aware of. So if you were auditing this internally, definitely take some time to consider the systems you have in place to prevent discrimination of services and to ensure that services are being provided equally across all people receiving them. Additionally, you want to schedule a review at least annually to publish these eligibility requirements and again, provide consistent service. So before we jump into the next section, can I get some thumbs up if you're still with me? Are those some good risks? Have you been considering those in your organization? Okay, very nice, very nice. I see them coming in. All right, now let's pivot a little bit away from those broad risks and touch briefly on managing volunteer risks, because volunteers can really be the lifeblood of an organization. Now, I know you see it here on the slide, but prior to this, did you know that the value of a volunteer's hour, according to a 2016 study by the independent sector, was that a volunteer's hour is worth about $24.14. Now, that may take you back a little bit because of just how significantly it exceeds the minimum wage. Now, I personally feel that this emphasizes the fact that volunteers are willing to provide advanced services for causes that they're passionate about. And as such, it means that for your organization, it's imperative to attract and maintain these high-value volunteers. And I would argue that the best way to do that is through a comprehensive risk management plan. Volunteers who are provided with clear instructions, guidelines, and metrics of how they'll be evaluated, and strategic recognition of their performance are much more likely to continue providing pro bono services. How many times do we have someone that's breaking their back working for the organization, doing everything we could want from them, and then the next problem comes up, and the next problem comes up. And it's not with the volunteer, but just another fire we have to put out. We need to make sure that we're implementing systems of recognition into our strategic plan, so that way we can acknowledge these key performers in our organization and thank them publicly for their service. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of a power thank you, but the concept behind a power thank you is that the more of an impact you want your thank you to have, the more public that thank you should be. So maybe at your annual gala, you shout out some of the top volunteers at your organization, or even just at the day of event, set aside time to publicly thank these individuals who are truly contributing to the organization. That is one of the most powerful risk management tips you can do, or you can implement in your organization, and it's as simple as saying thank you. Now, additionally, with regard to volunteers, there are some challenges. You want to have a differentiation in your onboarding strategy for done-in-a-day volunteers versus long-term assignments, and you also want to deeply consider what type of data retention practices you have employed at your firm or your organization. Now, essential data is sometimes needed to be kept for the volunteer. Specialized credentials or background checks, things of that nature may want to be retained, but they should be kept in a secure and locked location, physical or in a protected location in the cloud. Excessive retention of volunteer data truly opens up your organization to expensive cyber liability exposures and privacy concerns that could otherwise be avoided. I don't think your organization needs to save every note about a volunteer you had 10 years ago or 5 years ago. If you don't need it, if they're not actively there right now, get rid of that information. You can always acquire it later if they come back, and you're not liable for it. Now, moving away from those core risks, I want to touch on the mitigation and transfer of risk. And these are really the second and third aspect of risk management. The first being the evaluation of the risks we touched on previously, but mitigation is one of the most powerful things you can do. When it comes to risk, these are the two primary ways to do it. By utilizing both strategies, your organization is able to achieve true peace of mind and constantly strive towards achieving better goals. Protecting the organization that you've worked so hard to build should not be a challenge that you face alone either. By doing enhanced mitigation, you reduce the likelihood of a situation from ever happening in the first place, and that's truly the best way to go about it. This helps you to combat elements of uncertainty that we touched upon earlier and hardwire into your decision-making process that mitigation should be on the forefront. I tell people all the time that if you're going to have a risk management discussion once a year, or you're only going to practice mitigation once a year, then truly you might as well not do it at all. Mitigation is a living, breathing, active activity that you need to do for every decision in your organization, whether that's signing a new contract, bringing on new volunteers, or just starting a new event and helping with a new clientele. How can you reduce the likelihood of a claim from ever occurring? And then after you've spent time evaluating your risks and mitigating your risks, that's when I would encourage you to consider transferring them away. Now, transferring risk allows you to remove the burden of these risks away from your organization and onto a third party. The primary vehicle that I would suggest using for this is an insurance policy. Now, to bolster your risk mitigation efforts, I've provided a few strategies below that can be employed by your leadership or your risk management committee to help in their decision-making process. And I'm going to dive in a little bit deeper on these 4 things here. So first and foremost is risk identification. And we highlighted the 7 categories of risk previously, but I would encourage you to create a flow chart of your organization that will help you in identifying risk points. Pay special attention to any instances where third parties interact with your organization. This could be contractors, this could be volunteers, this could be corporate donors, look at all of the ways that they interact with your organization and make a list of them. Then you want to do a risk impact assessment. So as the second step of a risk mitigation process, you want to ballpark the impact of each identified risk that you considered in the prior step. Taking into consideration, you want to look at costs, scheduling hazards, impact on the performance of your mission, and functionality in the organization. Third, I would encourage you to do a risk prioritization analysis. And what is that? Well, this is taking a step back and saying, all right, here are all of our risks. We see how they may impact our organization, which could be catastrophic. Take the time to evaluate and rank each potential exposure to your organization from low to mission critical. And then after you've done the prior 3 steps, we're going to look at implementation and monitoring. While it would be optimal for all exposures to have a contingency plan, you want to start with those that are mission critical. It's not possible to account for each thing that could go wrong, nor is it worth your time. You want to take a step back and look at the mission critical risks and create a contingency plan for those. By establishing systems that proactively protect you, you'll be able to track the impact and changes in your organization and review additional safety metrics you may be able to implement going forward. Now, I mentioned previously that this shouldn't be something you do on your own. Whether you have no risk management capacity in your organization or you're a full-scale organization with a risk management team, utilizing an insurance and risk management advisor can be very powerful. Now, insurance for mission-critical risks that can't be mitigated can be transferred with a proper policy. And you must assume those risks to achieve your mission. If your organization has expanded beyond a hobby, then you're in a position where insurance would be of benefit for you. But it's also important to note that you don't want to over-insure. There's no reason to double insure, and there's no reason to insure for risks where you don't have exposures. So that's why it's important to make sure you do the first 2 steps of evaluation and mitigation to see what you really need to transfer away from the organization, right? The point here is not for you to buy every policy in the world. You want to buy the ones that are going to be protecting your mission critical risks that can't be mitigated and you need to transfer away from the organization to improve your sustainability. With the needs of each individual organization being so unique, it's impossible for one insurance policy to provide universal coverage. And I would encourage you to set aside the time to work with your risk management advisor so that way they can help your team stay on top of changing underwriting and insurance market conditions. Now, when I say that, I'm not telling you to call your risk management advisor every 6 months or even every year and demand that they do a full market search. It's not really how the space works. Markets are always changing, but it's really on a 2 to 3 year basis that you're going to find significant impacts to underwriting and premiums. So at least every 3 years, you should be doing a full market search of insurance policies and making sure that you still have the most competitive policy for your exposures. Now you may be asking yourself, that's great. What is insurance? Well, in this section, we're going to review a macro summary of the prevailing coverages you may want to consider for your organization. And I'm not going to dive too deep into them, but I want to just arm you with enough information so that way you're dangerous in the conversation and you can begin to navigate the labyrinth of endorsements, exclusions, and policy-specific coverages that may be available to you. But really deep diving into it is well beyond the scope of what this webinar will allow. So while this is a starting place, I would encourage you to discuss the transfer of risk with your current advisor. The general liability. This is one you may have heard of already. It protects your organization against liability claims for bodily injury or property damage that arises out of the premise, operations, products, and completed operations, as well as advertising or personal injury occurrences. Now, this is really the first line of defense for an organization and what you want to make sure you have implemented while transferring your risk. Property, inland marine. Now, this is something that can sometimes be bundled with your general liability in a package, but this type of policy will provide reimbursement to the owner or renter of a structure and its contents in the event of a covered damage or theft. Property can include things like physical buildings or tangible assets, but it can also include intangible assets. Now, Several classes of property may fall into the category of inland marine, and the primary difference is that property coverage protects things that aren't moving around, whereas inland marine provides protection for property that may be in transit, is movable, or property that's in your temporary care. It could also apply to unique or valuable property as well. Automobile liability. So this is what protects your organization against costs associated with injuries or property damage sustained by others in an accident. Very similar to what you have for your own personal car. Coverage can be written to include owned, hired, or non-owned automobiles as required by your specific circumstances. So if you have volunteers using their own cars and you want to be protected for that, you may want to pick up some hired and non-owned coverage. Or if you're putting people on buses, sending people on taxis during their lunch break, that type of thing, you want to make sure you have coverage in place, because if somebody gets hurt while they're on your clock, you can be found liable for that. Directors and officers. This is absolutely pivotal for nonprofit organizations, and it's how you attract really powerful directors and officers to your organization. Many times these are individuals who are affluent and they have assets that need to be protected. So this coverage indemnifies them from direct losses resulting from legal actions brought against the organization or them directly due to alleged wrongful actions in their capacity as leaders. And of course, intentionally illegal actions are typically not covered under this policy, and we would encourage no one to pursue any intentionally illegal activities. Errors and omission. Now, this doesn't apply to everyone, but this provides professional liability protection for organizations and their workers against claims made by clients for inadequate work or negligent actions. So if you have contractual obligations to perform in a certain way or produce a certain product, you want to make sure that you have this in place to protect yourself should something go awry, as they often tend to do. Moving right along, this is one that is essential for nonprofits as soon as you start having employees or significant amounts of volunteers engaging with your organization. EPLI provides protection and coverage for employers, meaning you, in your organization for claims made by employees that allege discrimination, wrongful termination, harassment, or a wide degree of other employment-related issues. And this, of course, can be extended to cover volunteers if someone feels that they were terminated due to age or a number of other reasons. Even if it's not the case, you are still responsible for defending yourself in a court of law. So maybe you finally got rid of that troubling employee that was causing a whole bunch of headaches, and they decided to take action back against your organization. You want to make sure you have protection in place for yourself to defend in that situation. Now, crime and fiduciary liability. Fiduciary can often be tacked on to directors and officers liability, but crime is many times a standalone policy. This policy protects against money or other property loss when your organization is targeted by embezzlement, forgery, robbery, or securities theft. It can also protect directors against fiduciary misappropriation of funding, where if they may have taken an action that turned out not to be correct. And it's also important to note that these policies do not extend to include cyber-related theft or extortion. And that's something we're about to touch on in the next slide. But I need to emphasize this. A crime and fiduciary policy will not protect you against cyber-related theft or extortion. But luckily, a cyber liability policy will. Now, this is what I describe as the general liability of the digital age. It's something that everybody should be carrying if you've grown into any type of significant organization. You know, if you're working with people, you're retaining data, you have exposures here. So cyber coverage is designed to help your organization mitigate risk by offsetting the costs associated with the recovery after a cyber-related security breach. Coverage can also protect you for the forensics, the cyber forensics associated with that breach, notification for people's credit and monitoring that they were just compromised, whether it's donor lists or client lists. It also provides protection for legal assistance in this situation if you have to come in and negotiate with someone who's holding your system hostage. Additionally, and this is something many people don't know, a cyber policy can provide coverage for any public relations expenses, right? Think about it for a moment. If your organization gets breached and that word gets out to the public eye, do you think individuals are going to be rushing to donate money to your organization? Especially, what if you have a highly affluent donor who's on your list, and now their personal cell phone number just got out there into the world, and maybe their social security as well? that doesn't reflect well for other affluent donors who may want to get involved. It may cause them to have second thoughts. So you want to make sure you have protection there for the public relation aspect associated with the cyber liability breach. I truly cannot stress this coverage enough as essential for your organization. And right now, it is very competitively priced. I encourage you to talk with your risk management advisor, because in the next 5 to 10 years, these policies will be going up in premium extensively. One metric by Chubb, as some of you may know, who's a leader in the insurance space, they think that 60% of their book could become cyber liability by 2024. So I would definitely encourage you to check this out while prices are still favorable and you can get grandfathered in. Now, last but not least, as far as insurances go, these are the boring insurances, so I kept a boring slide here. We're just going to go through it quickly. Workers' compensation, disability, paid family leave. These are state-mandated coverages, depending on your state, but they do 3 primary things. First, workers' comp is wage replacement should somebody get hurt on the job, and they receive these wages in exchange for relinquishing their ability to sue you, the employer, for any type of negligent or workplace safety. Additionally, disability is organized by the Social Security Administration and provides protection for workers should they incur an injury that prevents work permanently or for a long period of time. Now, the third one here, paid family leave, is something that many people are not familiar with. In New York State especially, it just came into play a couple of years ago. And this is funds or money that you receive while away from work for an extended period of time. So that way you can do a couple of things. First, you may be recovering from a serious health issue, or it also pays you if you're taking care of a seriously ill family member. Now, I'm not talking about your third cousins, but if it's your grandfather, your grandmother, or your mother, or a sibling, it can cover you there. And additionally, it provides additional reimbursement if you're going to bond with your newborn or newly adopted child. Now, I know everybody knows disability kicks in first, but paid family leave offers another option for you to consider. Whew. Hope everybody's still with me there. After running through those insurance protocols, I know that oftentimes it can seem overwhelming. So I hope that that was a good broad overview of the topics. And I encourage you to come back through when you receive the slide and the recording of this and review those again, so that way you're dangerous in that risk management conversation. As I stressed earlier, there's no reason to be overinsured, but you also want to make sure that you're not underinsured and leaving yourself open where you thought you may have had coverage. Now, as the last segment of this webinar, we're going to go through some risk evaluation tools that you can implement now for either your board of directors or your strategic risk management team, and implement these to help you make better decisions. Again, the idea is to increase sustainability in your organization, and you can do that by making proper decisions. So we're going to look at 3 here. All right. The first strategy I encourage people to consider is risk mapping. This is a fairly simple exercise that really helps you visualize where your risks are on the scale. So what you want to do is look at this assessment with magnitude on the bottom and frequency on the left. You want to then just simply map your risks accordingly, right? So is it a common activity that could occur, but it's going to have a low impact? Is it a rare activity that could have a high impact? Where do you see these risks occurring? Now, there's no right or wrong way to do this. It's simply anecdotal, and you want to do it so that way it applies to your specific organization. From there, it can help you identify your thoughts and show yourself really where you want to apply your risk mitigation planning and strategic crisis planning regarding each of these risks in your organization. Really powerful tool, really simple to use. It's a great warm-up, especially for a board meeting. Get everybody thinking, get your creative juices going, put it in that risk management mindset. Now, another really simple to use tool that I like to encourage people to utilize is a semi-quantitative analysis. It sounds more difficult than it is, let me assure you. Now, this approach establishes a framework for evaluating risk frequency and magnitude. So you can even use this and then apply them onto the prior one for risk mapping. It then combines both metrics to create a table that assists you in determining the prioritization of actions. So again, as you can see here in these examples, you want to rank them. And then if you do this in something like Excel, you can sort the table and get a really nice list of all of your risks that could be affecting your organization and decide where you want to allocate your resources. Because as we all know, as nonprofits, we have limited operational capital and also human capital, right? We only have so much manpower to throw at these problems. So where are we going to put the manpower? Last but not least is the decision tree analysis. And quite honestly, I think this is the most powerful risk management tool you can bring to your organization, and it's very comprehensive. So I ask those of you who despise math to stick with me while I break it down. It's a powerful tool, and trust me, math isn't my favorite subject either, but this is something I use all the time, and it really helps you make a decision. So a decision tree is useful for characterizing your risk preference and considering the uncertainty of new risks. Oftentimes, we find ourselves faced with decision paralysis, which can occur in situations where metrics of evaluating change are subject to multiple opinions. The tool provides a framework whereby your organization can analyze the opportunity costs against optimal outcomes. So for illustrative purposes, let's put this into a story here, right? So say we're considering extending the CEO contract of your organization or hiring a new leader. And maybe this is a director, maybe this is a CFO, right? How do you answer that question, right? Should we let someone go? Should we do a search? Now, in this strategy, the decision maker must take steps to consider several important pieces of information while undergoing their analysis. These include, what are the potential values of A, B, and C in the tree, whereby if action is selected, what is the probability A will occur versus B? And what is the decision maker's tolerance for risk, right? How willing are you to take a risk and make that change? The first step of this risk management process is to establish the expected value, otherwise known as EV, and there's the formula there. EV is what the decision maker, that's you, can expect to receive on average from taking the action, and it can be calculated through that formula. With our expected value in hand, we can then establish a certainty equivalent, or CE. Certainty equivalent is the value of C, which is the no change action, that would cause the decision maker to become indifferent. So really, C is not changing the person, keeping the director on, whereas the expected value is what would happen if you made the change. Now, if you're a decision maker and you're risk adverse, your CE is going to be less than your EV. If you're risk neutral, your CE is going to be equivalent to your EV. And if you're risk preferring, or you like to take risks and taking new challenges, your CE is going to be greater than your EV. So to put this back in context and using our example of hiring a new leader, let's say you brought on a search firm who suggested to your organization that the chance of finding an improved leader is 70%, based on who they see in the market, who's available, and your budget. Now, you take some time, and as a board, you deliberate and you evaluate the incumbent director. They rate the leader's current performance to be a 7 out of 10, right? And internally, you can use your own metrics to make that decision. After reviewing potential candidates, you maybe determine that a more successful leader would rate a 9 out of 10, right? So you have a 7 out of 10, and you think that a really successful leader that would change and revolutionize your organization would rate a 9 out of 10 of the metrics that you priorly determined. Whereas a poorly selected leader, so say the search goes wrong and you bring in somebody who's worse than your current leader, maybe that is a 5 out of 10. So using your metrics to establish an expected value, the search would likely result in a leader who would score a 7.8 out of 10. Now, 7 to 7.8, that's not really much of an improvement. So depending on your organizational tolerance to risk, it may be a better option not to pursue a search at this time and wait until better candidates are in the market. Now, I hope that wasn't too overwhelming with math and the equations, and I think that if you take a few moments to break it down, you'll see just how powerful this can be, especially in a boardroom discussion. Many times we have all these different voices coming into the conversation, and that can lead to risk. So I encourage you to use a decision tree while making highly controversial decisions. Now, taking a moment to back it up, what did we cover? Well, we reviewed the context of risk management in your organization. We looked at the risk management process from a global perspective. We touched upon how you can identify, evaluate, mitigate, and then transfer the 7 primary nonprofit risks. We looked at the types of insurance that are available to your organization in order to transfer these risks away from your organization. And then we went over 3 very powerful risk evaluation tools that you can implement in your next meeting to help yourself with the decision-making process. And now I'd like to take us into a Q&A section, and I would challenge you to consider a couple of these topics. What surprised you about this risk management? What maybe were you not considering in your risk management discussion? Are you having risk management discussions? Or is it once in a while, an annual thing? Because as I touched on before, if you're doing risk management once in a while, you might as well not do it. This really needs to be something that's ingrained in your organizational discussion and used in every single decision-making process to help the sustainability of your organization. So while we go over the Q&A, I'm going to leave this on our last slide here. Thank you for participating. I appreciate everyone taking the time to listen to this, and I truly hope that you found some tips and tactics of how you can increase the sustainability of your mission while reducing long-term costs and overwhelmingly implementing a peace of mind into your organization and decision-making process.
Thank you, Daniel. And just a reminder to everyone, if you do have a question, there's a drop-down panel on your control panel titled questions, and you can type them in there. As of right now, we don't have any, but we'll give it a couple minutes.
And of course, if you have more specific questions about your organization or how you can implement risk management or take better insurance protocols, please feel free to reach out to me directly if you don't want to discuss it in a public environment.
We'll make sure to include Daniel's information in the follow-up email we send as well. And a reminder, we're sending the recording and slides to you. So it doesn't look like we have anything coming in right now. So Daniel, if you're okay, I'll go ahead and wrap it up for the day.
Yeah, that's all right. You know, give everybody some time to think about it, and we can discuss offline. Thank you again, everybody, for your time today.
Yes, thank you for joining us for our expert speaker series, and want to thank Daniel again for his time. We hope you enjoyed the presentation and that you'll join us for future events and webinars. You can find that information by going to jmpconsulting.com and clicking on the events tab, and we will see you next month. Have a great day, everyone.